Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I am doing great. It is a new week. Last week, though, I got to celebrate my son as he competed in the state track tournament, and he placed 8th in shot put, and we're pretty proud of him. And for the first time in a very long time, he will not have track practice after school today, which is very, very bizarre to me.
Oh, yeah. Doesn't that throw things off? That's how I felt when the kids finished their play this semester.
Yeah.
Just messes everything up, doesn't it?
Right. All the routines are different now. Yeah.
Well, congratulations to him. That is so cool. 8th in the state as a freshman, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he's got a long, good career ahead of him. So pretty excited to watch him develop.
That's so cool.
Yeah. How are you guys?
Man, I am feeling middle-aged today.
Okay.
I have had a very physically busy 3 or 4 days. I did a long kayaking trip with my wife. I did a long run because Saturdays are a day that I run long. I had to get my lawn mowed, and we had been away the weekend before, so it was literally 1.5 feet tall. So I was having to push through that. Then I had a couple other things to do. Oh, and the day before I went kayaking with my wife, I went rock climbing with my son. I am just feeling a little creaky today.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a lot of activity.
It is. I'm tired.
Yeah.
But all good things. And I am looking out at my lawn right now thinking how delighted I am that my lawn is cut. But
you're just rubbing it in.
Is your lawn not cut?
No, I went to mow it the other day and my mower would not stay running.
That's such a pain.
It's a riding mower and I would get like 10 feet down the way and it would die. And I'm like, what is going on? So I did all sorts of research on this problem, and ultimately, I think the recommendation is to replace all the gas lines. So I have all the gas lines stripped out, and I have a new fuel filter, and I've got all the new lines cut to length and everything. And now I just need to install them. I ran out of time. So now I just have a lawnmower with no guts sitting in my driveway. So eventually I will put all the lines back in and see if it will stay running.
Oh man, this is even funnier because I think it was last week that I talked to you and asked if your riding lawnmower broke as often as mine does. And I believe your answer at the time was, no, that's not been my experience at all.
Yeah, it was. So thanks for the curse.
That's awesome. Well, maybe we can distract you a little bit from your lawn woes. What did you call to talk about today?
Yeah, so this is going to be a challenging episode because I want to talk a little bit more about the rich young ruler.
Oh, yeah.
So I brought this up in the thoughts segment a week or two ago, and I am kind of stewing on this because this has always been a challenging text because the rich young ruler went away sad because he had lots of wealth. And that seems to describe pretty much all Americans, that we all have a lot of wealth, at least compared to the rest of the world. And so I kind of would love to just kick around, like, what is wealth exactly? And when do you draw the line? But also I want to dive into a part of this text that I think is really fascinating. One commentator indicated that the reason that the disciples were so shocked when Jesus said, yeah, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. They were so shocked at that because the Old Testament seems to indicate that riches is a blessing from God, and that if you live a good, God-honoring life, God will reward you with riches. And so then they were like, wait a minute. So then if you have riches, you can't go to heaven? Like, what is going on here? And so I am similarly baffled, and I would love to know, A, what is wealth? And B, does it come from God or is it a bad thing?
Yeah, I think these are really good questions. I'm really interested to dig into what wealth is. And then I think it's fascinating to go back and look at the Old Testament as the Bible that Jesus and his initial disciples had and say, what does it have say about wealth? And then what do we do with that is a whole other question.
Yes. Yes. Well, I love that you mentioned, again, the Old Testament. I'm looking at just Deuteronomy 8:18, one simple verse. And right in the heart of the law, right? The Deuteronomy is kind of the national standard for how to follow Yahweh. And it just says, remember Yahweh your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. In other words, God gives you this ability, and your wealth is a direct confirmation of the covenant that he's instituting right here in Deuteronomy.
I'm not entirely sure that's what that says, but I think it would be disturbing if it did say that. Or
Okay.
at least complicated.
You read it differently.
I do read it a little bit differently. I don't know that I would have before your comment last week. Was it last week?
Sure, we'll say it was.
Whenever it was. I also found this really interesting and started digging into a bunch of texts and articles about this. And really the one that I found the most helpful was this article from the Theology of Work Project on God's provision and wealth. And we can post the link to that because it was really, I don't know about you, but most of the time when I see something on the internet, I assume it's just garbage.
Hey, wait a minute. We're on the internet.
I assume it's just garbage. And, but I assume everything on the internet is generally about the level that we are, right? A couple of people who don't necessarily have any qualifications kicking around some ideas. We are smart, but that doesn't make us experts. We are part of the people having the conversation. And, that's great. I am for the conversation. But this particular article, I think, sets that Deuteronomy passage in context in two ways that I think are very important. The first is from before the fall, in which God's blessing on the earth, contra what happens at the curse, is that a reasonable amount of work would result in reasonable blessing, right? It's, man, you're not just going to have to kill yourselves to get the food that you need.
Yeah.
So coming back to the verse that you said, which is 8:18, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth. It doesn't say that the wealth is the blessing from God, right? It says that the power to gain wealth is the blessing from God, which is different to me.
Right.
And
I see the semantic difference, but at the end of the day, it still produces wealth. And so let's say God gave you the ability or he gave you the wealth, whatever. Now you have a truckload of money. Is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? Isn't that a sign that you have been following God's covenant?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can we read backwards that way? You can always say, according to this verse, if you have the ability to make wealth, you are blessed. Does that mean once you have the wealth, it is a sign that you are blessed? I think the Old Testament says no. I don't think you can read it that way for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a host of places like from the same article, Amos 2:6-7 says, for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4, I will not revoke their punishment because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. The idea of this and many other passages is that there are a lot of people who get wealthy by abusing the poor. Therefore, at least some people are wealthy, and it is not a sign of blessing from God, for God is judging it. Right?
Sure. And I think you see that sentiment all throughout both testaments. That
absolutely.
You cannot produce wealth through, unethical gain. Victimizing people is absolutely condemned in nearly every book of the Bible. So, but let's throw that unethical thing aside. Let's just say you have done things ethically. Isn't that wealth a sign of God's blessing?
Again, this is a great question. And I don't know that this answers it, but before I wrestle with this, one of the other things that this same article said, because it dissected the question exactly the same way, which I thought was really interesting. And so then let's assume theoretically it is possible to become wealthy without damaging other people.
Okay.
That seems to me to be an unproven assumption, but let's assume. Then it goes into a variety of verses from the prophets and from Proverbs that talk about wealth as inherently dangerous. Places like Ezekiel 28:5 that says, by your great wisdom in trade. So this is theoretically a good, it's not by abusing the poor. It's you were wise, which is theoretically a good thing, in trade. You have increased your wealth, and your heart has become proud in your wealth. And it goes on to say that the result of being wealthy was pride.
But again, with the unethical means of attaining wealth, that is just an unethical decision made with the wealth. I mean, if it's theoretically possible to become wealthy without being unethical, isn't it theoretically possible to become wealthy and not prideful? And so here is Proverbs 10:22. The blessing of Yahweh brings wealth without painful toil for it. I mean, that is just God's blessing in material gain. Pure and simple, no qualifications.
Yeah, and I obviously would affirm that verse, at least by saying, all other things being equal, doing things God's way will bring material gain more than not doing things God's way. Like that verse from my buddy's poem that I referenced a couple of weeks ago, except for when it doesn't, because there's all the Psalms that we could refer to that speak of when the unrighteous are winning the day.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I was thinking of as you were reading that verse, I think doing things God's way does often bring blessing. Let's say normatively, all things else being equal brings blessing. Also, the Bible teaches that the way of the wicked, at least temporarily, can bring blessing.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
So therefore, I think we can say the financial prosperity itself is not necessarily a sign of God's blessing, because it can come from and be used both for good or for evil, to honor God or not. Maybe it itself is a morally neutral thing, and you have to dig deeper than that to find out whether this is a blessing of God or not. So for the people of Israel, God was saying, this is a blessing I'm going to give you if you do things my way. And they didn't get it. But if things had gone differently, we could have said that. For the people that are being criticized in the prophets, their wealth is not a sign of being blessed by God. I guess what I'm getting out of all of this is surface level judgments about people based on their affluence is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take on all of this, because in the Christian circles that I've been a part of, we have been historically, I think, very uncomfortable with wealth, and that wealth is somehow maybe a bad thing, or you're not giving enough, or you're too focused on money and not enough on God's kingdom. And so I think there's this general discomfort with wealth in the church, at least certain pockets of the church, right? There are other pockets that celebrate it to no end. And I think the circles I'm in find that to be nauseating. But so I don't know that it's morally neutral in our minds. And I don't think we are necessarily free of judgment when it comes to assessing somebody's overall financial standing.
Yeah, no, I think you are absolutely right. I think coming back to your initial question, I think we are very judgmental of people not who are wealthy, but who are wealthier than us.
Sure.
Which, again, is to ask, is sort of my way of edging back towards your first question. In the 21st century, in the United States, what does it mean to be wealthy?
I struggle with this so much. This is such an uncomfortable topic to talk about, period, let alone record it. But, I don't think we are a rich family by any means. We struggle to make ends meet. But at the same time, we have multiple vehicles. We live on some property. We send our kids to private school. And we have all of our needs met. We all are clothed and fed. We don't worry about where the next meal is going to come from. And we get to, occasionally take a vacation, and we get to play. So are we really that bad off? No, clearly not. But yet it feels tight, and we stress about things every month. So is that wealthy? I mean, by some standards, maybe. By other standards, clearly not. I don't know what to do with that. And because I think if we look at people on a global level, we're clearly more wealthy than most of the world. But in our society, are we wealthy? I wouldn't necessarily think so.
Yeah, I wrestle with this all the time for a host of reasons. I don't think of myself as incredibly wealthy. The house I live in would be valuated at right about mid-level in the city that I live in. I live 2 miles away. I live 4 miles away from one of the 10 largest houses in America. Did I tell you that? Have I said that?
I had no idea.
Yeah. I drive by it. I'll drive by it today, taking my daughter to horseback lessons.
Wow.
It is massive. The estimates on the size of this particular house range in their estimates across a 10,000 square foot range. So 5 times the size of my house is their range of error in guessing how big this house is. And that is to say nothing of the 4 stables that this particular house has, all of which have to be 3 to 4 times the size of my house.
Wow.
So I drive by that house and I think it's worth 100 times what my house is worth. I'm not that wealthy. But on the flip side of things, I have the luxury of not having to focus on doing whatever it takes to make money to pay the bills in order to pursue a career that I am passionate about, regardless of the fact that it's going to take a couple of years to start making money. That feels like a huge luxury to me.
Yeah.
And that is largely because we have been wise with our money for decades, and because my wife has a great job. And so I guess one of the things as I was wrestling with this, as you were wrestling with this, does the question, am I one of the wealthy people? Is that the question that will help me follow Jesus the best? Or is there a better question I should be asking based on this text? I'm not, and I don't mean that in a leading way. That question tends to get me spinning, and I'm not sure it helps. So I guess I'm just asking, is there a better question we can ask?
I am feeling that same thing in the midst of our conversation, that this question can is unanswerable. Am I one of the wealthy ones or not? And I think because the ultimate reason for asking that question is, therefore, does this verse apply to me or not? And I just don't think that that's the helpful way to go about it as we're talking about it. I think all verses about money apply to all of us. I think we should adopt the attitudes and the posture toward money that the Bible encourages. And this individual had a posture toward money and wealth that was preventing him from following Jesus fully.
Yeah. See, now that's a question. In what ways are your finances potentially preventing you from following Jesus fully? If I ask that question, where does it get you?
That gets me a lot of uncomfortable places. I mean, honestly, the first of which, as I mentioned earlier, we stress about money a lot. And I think that stress is a distraction from trusting God. Like, do I trust God or not? Well, for most things, but I don't know about for providing for the next month's whatever. So I think it is a huge distraction from following Jesus fully that I stress so much about money.
That's a very fair and vulnerable answer. And I think it's one that a lot of people will probably resonate with. My own answer to that question, because I don't feel like it's fair to ask you and then not try to answer it. My own answer to that question really has to do with the major transition that I'm in from full-time pastoral ministry to not. It's very interesting to me. When I was pastoring, I gave myself a pass on financially providing for my family. I'm doing something more important. So it's okay to put that weight on my wife. As I have transitioned out of that role, I find myself realizing, even now when I'm in a role that I am starting something and therefore not bringing a lot of finances into the house, I feel, I think, an appropriate weight to be a benefit to my family, a financial benefit to my family, that I didn't feel because I felt like the ministry requirements trumped that requirement, which is the division of, or the oversimplification of the spiritual, the secular, and the sacred from a very different direction, but it's still that same split, if that makes sense. I find myself asking, was it appropriate to give myself that pass, to let that weight land on my wife for those years? And I don't know that the way I balanced that was honoring to God or honoring to my family. I don't know if that makes sense to you as an answer to this question, but that's what comes to mind as I wrestle with this.
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, I think you're saying that you separated following Jesus and making money as, one is spiritual, one is secular, if you will. And you were doing the spiritual thing, so you didn't have to worry about the secular thing. Other people could worry about that. And you feel like that division is not actually correct.
Yeah, I think that's, and tripped up my relationship with God because I was too narrow in what my relationship with God was. I was thinking about the ministry universe. I was thinking about what is my relationship with God rather than what is our, as in my family's relationship with God. And how do our financial decisions impact that?
Well, it's fascinating that, this is where I think the Old Testament passages about money are actually really helpful, because God so clearly tied together his provision along with following the covenant. That, look, you're going to follow me, and this is the ways in which you're going to do it, and I will amply provide for you in the process. And in some ways, I think we've taken that too far, just like you're describing, where we say, oh, well, therefore I don't have to worry about the money piece. God's going to worry about the money piece. I just have to follow God. And I think what these passages are actually doing is saying, no, these things are tied together. You will both earn money and follow me as all part and parcel of the same pursuit. And I think when we divorce the two too much, we make it an either or choice. I'm either following God or I'm following, earning money and building wealth. And I think when we separate anything from our relationship with God, we forget that God is part of the totality of our experience, including what it means to make and spend money.
And do you feel, I totally agree that is true in what I was saying. Do you feel like that is also relevant to what you were saying about the worries and stresses that you have felt regarding money?
I don't know that I had thought this way going into it. And so I would like to spend some time re-engaging that. So yes, I guess if I'm reflecting on it now, I would say, yeah, these things are a little bit separate in my mind. And I think if I brought the two together, it would be very, very helpful to me.
Yeah, I think this is maybe one of those ongoing challenges for many of us. Is it's easy, I guess, to pat ourselves on the back in the areas that we have fully engaged with God. And we can very easily have blind spots to the areas we have not fully engaged with God until we have conversations like this. And then the question is, how do we fully incorporate or invite God into that area of life, right?
Yeah.
Because that's easy to say.
Right. Well, and especially since I've got to unpack a lot of my evangelical baggage around this. To welcome God into the process of making money feels it feels very wrong. Like I said, we have this judginess around people who have made money, and it just doesn't feel like, right? We've made this an either or, right? You either follow God or you follow mammon. And I feel like God is saying, no, follow me and I will give you the power to make money. Like these things are going to merge into the same stream. And that feels wildly uncomfortable to me.
Have you already said exactly what it is that feels so uncomfortable about that to you?
No, because I don't know that I can name it, other than the fact that it seems to conflict with every teaching on money that I have ever received or interpreted.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, what is the basic summary of what I was taught? I feel like I was taught a fair amount about spending money, right? Tithe, save, then spend. That's at least a grid.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I was taught nearly as much about making money theologically.
Yeah, other than don't do it by unethical gain.
Don't tread on the head of the poor.
Right, exactly. But again, this is where our posture toward money is potentially not helped by the fact that we've failed to include God in the process at all. That, yeah, God is involved in the process of spending our money, like you said, but he also provides the ability to earn it. He also is there in the earning of it. That is part and parcel of following God's covenant. So
absolutely,
if we have separated him from that process, then we're going to have an unhealthy posture toward money.
Yeah. As you're describing this, where this actually hits my practical everyday life immediately?
Ooh, no, where?
As someone who is working for myself and providing a coaching and consulting service to people, I have to price my services. How much am I going to charge?
Mm-hmm.
And my instinct is to charge as little as possible. Part of it is wanting to make a service available to people, but part of it is feeling uncomfortable asking people for their money. as if that were somehow unclean or unchristian.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so it's a concession to the unfortunate way of the world that I'm charging you for this. So I better do as little charging as possible.
Right.
And a number of times in a number of different contexts, folks that I have worked with or gotten advice from have really challenged me on that to think, no, if you're providing a service that's worthy, then it is more than just acceptable. It is perfectly appropriate and God honoring to charge appropriately for that service. And that's really hard for me to think of it as God honoring to charge for a service.
Right. Immensely complicated. It makes me think also of my senior pastor, and every year we do what they call kind of Vision Sunday, which it's a little bit business meeting and a little bit vision of the church. And one of the things that he always does in the name of full disclosure is state before the church what his salary is. And he doesn't disclose the salaries of all the other pastors or whatever, but just, hey, I want you to know this is how much the church pays me. And he will consistently say, some of you think that's too much. I get that. Some of you think that's way too little. And I have heard both after one of these services. And so at the end of the day, I mean this as politely as possible. I kind of don't care because I didn't set the salary. The elders did. So, which I just think is beautiful. But yeah, because it's a really uncomfortable thing. Like if you took a poll of like, should I charge for this? And if so, how much? You'd get the same reaction. Some people would be like, oh my gosh, if you're doing it in the name of Jesus, you should be doing it for free. And other people are like, no, you need to charge what you're worth, and on down the line. We don't have a good understanding of this as evangelicals because I don't think we've included the money-making process as part of what it means to follow Jesus.
Absolutely. And it is further complicated by the way in which what we do is we're not producing something concrete. If I were farming, it would make a little bit more sense to me. Because I could sell my grain at whatever is a universally agreed upon price for grain, and it is what it is. But so what do you think, at least when we think about first steps, what are first steps we could take towards wrestling more intentionally with this integration of making money and following Jesus?
I think the first step is honestly a prayer, a prayer, a posture of prayer, an ongoing prayer that just says, all right, God, I'm reconnecting my following of Jesus and my earning money. These things are not separated any longer. And I invite you into this process. I invite you into my finances, from making money to spending money to tithing to giving to being a host to whatever else it means to have money. I think I have so much shame and unease around money and God and like, what should I be doing and all of that, that I think we just need to re-engage God in the process. And so that just means a posture of prayer that says, all right, God, I'm not separating these two things anymore. I invite you into my finances from start to finish.
I love that. I think that's such a powerful reminder. Not that that one prayer is going to magically change anything.
Right.
But it is a re-engagement of the conversation with God.
Yeah.
That then invites further conversations. It reminds me of, there have been a variety of moments where, due to scheduling, the two of us haven't been able to talk for a couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks, whatever. This used to happen all the time in the summers before we had to talk because we had a podcast.
Right.
And before we could have a real conversation, we felt like we had to summarize everything that had happened. You had to kind of get caught up.
Yeah.
And it feels like that prayer that you're mentioning, which I felt myself praying while you were saying, I felt like you were leading me and everybody who's listening in prayer. And I would certainly invite the folks who are listening to like jump back 2 minutes and let that be a moment of prayer for them. Because I loved what you were saying in that moment. But it felt like a reconnecting prayer, not a one and done, but a, God, I want to be engaged with you in this conversation. Now that I've said that, I feel far freer when the topic comes up to talk to you about it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly it. There's so many times where, we don't want to have the awkward, quote unquote, crucial conversation, right? Whether that's something our kids are embarrassed to talk to us about, or whether that's like a heavy topic we don't really want to talk with our spouse about, but we kind of have to, right? And we all have that experience of like, okay, great, we finally had that conversation. And the phrase I often use is, now that's a thing we talk about. Like, we've broken the ice a little bit. And it feels like that, okay, we need to have that initial conversation with God, and now that's a thing we talk about.
That's good. Yes. And then, at least for me, it'll come down to actively looking for opportunities to re-engage the conversation and ways to keep my mind thinking about the conversation so that it doesn't slide off into nothing. This is the moment where I want to start thinking about who are the people I know who really do get this on a better level than I do? Or what does it mean to engage with God for me in the moment when I'm setting a price? How do I incorporate God into that conversationally? Kind of sort of putting down some stakes in the ground that help me continue to engage this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to turn to our audience as well. And this is a super uncomfortable topic in our society and in our evangelical circles. So could you take this episode, share it with a friend, and say, hey, I don't know how to be praying about money and following Jesus all in the same moment. Can we talk about this? If this episode could be a springboard to better prayer, better conversation, and better engagement with this topic, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you don't know how to start the conversation, and sharing this episode can be a way of starting what could otherwise be a very awkward conversation.
Yeah. Well, we are in the midst of our Summer in the Psalms series, and we hope that our audience is engaging along with us. If not, feel free to pick up right where you left off, right where we've left off. So you can find our reading plan right here in the show notes, and we'd love to engage in the Psalms with you. But during this Summer in the Psalms series, we'd like to share some thoughts that we have gleaned from this week's reading. So Josh from Missouri, what are you thinking about in the Psalms?
This actually is coming from the book that I am reading by O. Palmer Robertson called The Flow of the Psalms. And the chapter that I was reading this week offers what I think is a really powerful sort of grid through which to look at the Psalms. He suggests we could look at the Psalms through our sort of systematic theology lens, looking for God, Trinity, Spirit, sin, redemption, eschatology, those kinds of things. And instead, he suggests that the series of lenses we should look through it are the covenants God had made from creation all the way up to David. And this really struck me because one of the questions you said you were thinking about as you walked into the Psalms this year is, how do we live in Yahweh's world? And in terms of the general creation covenant that God has with the world, he uses this wonderful phrase. He speaks of the original creational ordinances of labor, marriage, and Sabbath. So there's this original creation covenant that God makes with humanity. And just like there are ordinances, baptism and communion, that mark the renewed covenant in Christ through the cross and the resurrection, he speaks of the ordinances of the original covenant. Labor, that is what we were talking about today, marriage, and Sabbath. And he challenges us to be looking for those themes in the Psalms. So the host of places where it talks about rest, but it talks about rest in God rather than just rest. Or the way that it talks about our role as God's representatives on earth as sort of sub-rulers, sub-regents with God in the world. And how one of the things I thought was really cool is he talks about how the way that Psalms describes our work in the world is, this is from, what Psalm is this? Psalm 8. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all flocks and herds and beasts of the field, birds of the air, fish of the sea, etc. And he talks about how the idea here is that what he calls the everyman, that is just the general human being, is made by God to be a ruler. And therefore, if every person on earth is made to be a king in his own right, the Psalms that refer to David as king have an interesting relevance to every person who is a king in his or her own right under the terms of the original covenant of creation.
This is really interesting. So,
isn't that just fascinating?
Yeah, but I actually want to juxtapose that actually with my thought from the Psalms.
Ooh, okay.
Because what I fear is that idea could be applied very individualistically. And I think that is the trap that we fall into in our society more than anything. When we look at spiritual truths, we try to figure out, how does this apply to me? And we don't necessarily ask the question, how does that apply to us? And that's actually what I found really fascinating about Psalm 22. Psalm 22, of course, this is the one that Jesus quotes on the cross and begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me? And on down the line it goes. I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people, right? And all these things about I am suffering, and look at me and me. And I think, okay, well, now we're in a very individualistic frame of mind. But by the time you get to the end of the psalm, we're not talking about the individual level anymore. Right? If you look all the way down at verse 27, all of the ends of the earth will remember and turn to Yahweh, and all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to Yahweh, and he rules over the nations. And again, on through the end of the psalm, we're looking at a very global perspective. And it actually kind of goes through three phases in my mind. The psalm begins on this very individualistic level. And then it begins to talk about the anointed one of Israel. And then it starts talking about the global level of everybody bringing honor to Yahweh. And that worldview is really, really challenging to me, one that I want to grow in, because I feel like if I'm stuck in an individualistic mindset, I stay there. I don't often expand the scope to think, okay, well, then what does this mean for the nation, right, with the anointed one of Israel? But then what does this look like on a global level to know that God is in charge, that he is the ruler over all? That is different to me than, God, help me. You're the only one that can help me. Help me, me. Your thought on the Psalms, I just worry that somebody's going to take that too individualistically.
No, I think this is a great point. When I put these two things together, I'm actually drawn to the image in the book of Revelation as I continue to read and reread the book of Revelation for our upcoming fall series on it, I am brought to the image of the 24 elders who are all cumulatively casting their crowns before God.
Mm-hmm.
And this image of feeling invited into this image of being a person of authority, whatever authority that may be, among other people of authority, all of whom are actively surrendering, joyfully and worshipfully surrendering that authority to God in whatever way or ways that means.
Yeah. I'm drawn to that image as well, that all of these very exalted rulers that have access to God's throne, humbly prostrating themselves and even throwing their crowns toward Jesus' feet and saying, "You're the king, we are nothing." That is a good image to balance with this idea that we're all, I guess, to use your words, kings in our own right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of all of us being kings, you know what every king needs?
Every king needs a which Josh question?
Well, I was going to say a throne. And this particular which Josh question has to do with Josh's preferred throne, I think.
It's yours. I am picturing that you're about to set us up for like a toilet joke, but
oh, I am not, though that could have happened as well. No, this week's Which Josh question is, which Josh is in love with a massage chair?
This is me, Josh from Oregon. So at work, we have so for those that are just now tuning in, I work at a 911 center, and our center has what we call a quiet room. It has a couch and a couple of lazy boys, and very dim lighting, and it's wonderful to go and unwind in. But our director recently purchased and even assembled himself a massage chair in the quiet room. Oh my gosh, this thing is amazing. You go and sit in this chair, and it's got like a little spot to like slide your arms in as well. So it massages the bottoms of your feet. It has like these air pillows that squeeze your calves. They squeeze your hips. They squeeze your forearms that you've stuck in this little, in these little holes. And then it's massaging your back all at the same time. And then as it goes, it like kind of rhythmically pulses up and down your body with all of these different squeezing and massaging movements. And it's like 15 minutes of bliss. It is so good. Every person I talk to at work, I'm like, "Have you tried the massage chair yet? Oh my gosh, it's so good." So yes, I am in love with the massage chair.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever used a real massage chair. I'm going to have to like go try the one at the mall out as the closest option I've got.
See, that seems a little like, I don't know.
Seems a little weird, doesn't it?
It's totally weird in that context. Like, I feel like, I don't know, mall goers are just dirty. I don't know.
Oh, no judgment. Except for that one.
Yeah. No, I'm not judgy.
Well, someday I too may have an opportunity to experience a massage chair. Until then, I will simply be envious of you and yours.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So today we've learned about judgment and envy and money. That's great.
Good summary statement.
All right. Let's talk again next week.
All right. I'll talk to you then.
All right. Bye-bye.